The old star charts had warned them about this region. Here be dragons, the modern translation said, though Tom Miller knew that wasn't quite right. He stood at the observation deck of the research vessel Star Seeker *, watching as his alien colleagues moved their scanning equipment into position. The ship hung motionless in space, surrounded by what looked like an ancient graveyard of massive vessels. "Another waste of time," muttered lead researcher Gray, his blue scales reflecting the dim light of the distant sun. "These primitive hulks can't possibly tell us anything we don't already know about early spacefaring races." Tom said nothing, but his eyes narrowed as he studied the closest vessel through the reinforced window. Something about its design tickled at the back of his mind. As the only human member of the archaeological team, he had learned to keep his thoughts to himself until he was certain. "Beginning structural scan," announced Technician White, her 4 arms moving gracefully across the control panel. The scan results began appearing on the main screen, showing the internal layout of the nearest derelict ship. Tom's heart skipped a beat. The layout was familiar. Too familiar. "Look at this primitive propulsion system," Gray laughed, pointing at the scan results. "Nuclear fusion. How quaint. And these weapon systems, they used physical projectiles. Actual chunks of metal. Can you imagine?" "Sir," Tom spoke up, trying to keep his voice steady, "I think we should take a closer look at these ships. Why waste our time, Miller? These are clearly relics from a civilization that never made it past development stage 3. They probably destroyed themselves before reaching true enlightenment." Tom walked closer to the screen, his finger tracing the outline of the ship's engine room. "These designs, they're human." The statement was met with silence, then laughter. "Impossible," Gray said, wiping tears from his eyes. "Your species only achieved spaceflight a few centuries ago. These ships are at least 50,000 years old." "Look at the engineering," Tom insisted. "The redundant systems, the mechanical backups, the way the hull is sectioned." He pointed to various parts of the scan. "This is human engineering. We always built things to last, to keep working even when parts failed. And look at the weapon systems. They're not primitive, they're practical." White moved closer to the screen, her interest finally piqued. He might have a point about the redundancy. "These systems are surprisingly robust." "We should dock with the command ship," Tom suggested, pointing to the largest vessel in the fleet. "If I'm right, there might still be accessible data cores. Human computers were built to last millennia." Gray made a dismissive gesture with his tail. "Fine, waste your time if you must. But I expect a full report on why these primitive vessels are so fascinating." The docking procedure took 3 hours. Despite their age, the ship's airlocks were still functional, responding to universal docking protocols that hadn't changed much in 50,000 years. Tom led the boarding party, his heart pounding in his environmental suit. The ship's corridors were dark and cold, but structurally sound. Their lights revealed surfaces free from major deterioration. Another sign of human engineering. They found their way to the bridge, where rows of ancient consoles stood silent. "More primitive technology," Gray scoffed, running a scanner over a console. "They still used physical interfaces. How did they ever manage to?" He was cut off by a low hum. The bridge lights flickered, then steadily grew brighter. Displays began to power up, one by one. "Impossible," White whispered. "These systems shouldn't have power after all this time." Tom smiled behind his faceplate. "Human nuclear cores were built to last. We learned that lesson early. You can't always count on having a replacement handy." A holographic display sparked to life in the center of the bridge, showing a rotating Earth symbol that Tom instantly recognized. Text began scrolling across the nearest screen in ancient English. "Co-ntngncy fleet alpha. Stasis pior to cols disengaged. Awaiting command authorization." "Can you read this ancient text?" Gray asked, his earlier dismissiveness giving way to curiosity. "Yes," Tom replied, moving toward the main console. And I think I just found out why my ancestors built this fleet. He paused, his hand hovering over what was clearly an activation panel. They were waiting for something, or preparing for something. The ship's systems continued to wake up around them, each display showing more information about the fleet's capabilities. Tom's colleagues had stopped laughing. Now they watched in silence as humanity's ancient legacy came to life before their eyes. None of them realized yet that they would soon be very grateful for this discovery and for humanity's primitive approach to engineering and warfare. Tom's fingers moved carefully across the ancient console. Despite the age of the system, the keys felt solid under his touch. The bridge of the massive warship hummed with growing power as more systems came online. "Be careful, Miller," Gray warned, his scales now a pale shade of blue from nervousness. These ancient systems could be dangerous. A small smile crossed Tom's face as text appeared on the main screen. Voice recognition required. Speak command authorization. They really did think of everything, Tom muttered. He cleared his throat and spoke clearly. Command authorization requested. Human DNA detected. The bridge lights pulsed once, and a deep voice filled the room. It spoke in perfect modern standard, surprising everyone present. DNA scan confirmed. Human operator detected. I am Admiral, the fleet's artificial intelligence. Welcome aboard, descendant. White's four hands froze over her scanning equipment. That's impossible. An AI this old shouldn't be able to speak our modern language. Learning and adaptation were primary directives, Admiral replied. I have monitored all transmissions in this sector for 50,000 years, updating my language databases accordingly. Tom felt a chill run down his spine. You've been awake all this time. Minimal power mode, but yes. Waiting, watching, learning. The AI's voice carried a hint of what almost sounded like pride. Your ancestors built me to last, to protect, to prepare. Gray stepped forward, his scientific curiosity finally overcoming his dismissiveness. Prepare for what? Before Admiral could answer, Technician White's communicator buzzed. Lead researcher Gray, we're detecting power signatures from the other ships. The entire fleet, it's waking up. Through the bridge windows, they watched as ship after ship came to life. Running lights flickered on along massive hulls. Engine cores began to glow with building power. Each ship has its own AI subnet, Admiral explained. They are all part of me, and I am part of them. 47 vessels, each with a specific purpose in the fleet. Tom walked to the window, watching in awe as the ancient fleet awakened. Why were you built? What were my ancestors preparing for? The main screen filled with star charts and ancient data streams. Your ancestors detected a pattern in their studies of the galaxy. They realized that civilizations tend to follow predictable paths of technological development. Most races eventually focus entirely on energy-based weapons and defenses, abandoning physical warfare. Of course, Gray interrupted. It's the natural progression of military technology. Energy weapons are superior in every way. Are they? Admiral's voice carried a hint of amusement. Your ancestors, Tom Miller, saw this pattern and recognized it as a potential vulnerability. They built this fleet as a contingency, using technology that would remain effective regardless of how energy-based defenses evolved. White's scanner began beeping urgently. The weapon systems, they're all kinetic. Rail guns, missile launchers, even nuclear warheads. But they're built with materials and engineering I've never seen before. Humanity's gift to the future, Admiral said. Your ancestors knew that someday their descendants might face a threat that could not be stopped by energy weapons alone. They built us to last, to wait, to be ready when needed. Suddenly, every screen on the bridge flashed red. Admiral's voice became urgent. Long-range sensors detecting multiple anomalies at the edge of the system. Pattern matches historical records. The threat your ancestors predicted, it's here. The main screen showed a mass of ships emerging from hyperspace. They moved like a swarm of insects, their hulls seeming to absorb all light that touched them. "What are they?" Tom asked, though something in his gut told him he already knew. "The reason we were built," Admiral replied. "The threat your ancestors saw coming. A race that evolved beyond energy weapons by becoming immune to them." Gray's scales had turned almost white. "Those ships, their hulls are absorbing all energy readings. Our weapons would be useless against them." "Yes," Admiral confirmed. "But humanity's primitive kinetic weapons, those will work just fine." The AI paused, then added, "Tom Miller, the fleet awaits your command. Your ancestors left us here for this moment. What are your orders?" Tom looked at his alien colleagues, then back at the approaching swarm. Finally, he understood why humanity had built this fleet, why they had made it to last, why they had waited. The laughter had stopped. Now it was time to show the galaxy why human engineering was anything but primitive. "We need to warn the Galactic Council," Gray said, his scales shifting nervously as he watched the swarm of ships approach on the main screen. "They need to know what's coming." Tom stood at the command station, watching as Admiral displayed tactical information about the approaching enemy. The swarm moved like a single organism, their black ships absorbing all light around them. "Long-range communication systems active," Admiral announced. "But I must warn you, the Council's response may not be what you expect." Tom nodded and activated the communication array. Within moments, the stern face of Council Director Baker appeared on the main screen. His metallic skin reflected the light of his office's crystal walls. "Lead Researcher Gray, what is the meaning of?" The director's voice trailed off as he saw the ancient bridge behind them. "Where are you? What is this?" "Director," Gray began, "we've discovered something remarkable. An ancient human fleet, but that's not important right now. We're detecting a massive hostile force approaching our sector." The director's expression hardened. "Hostile force? Our sensors detect nothing." "They wouldn't," Tom interrupted, stepping forward. "These ships absorb energy. Your modern sensors can't detect them properly." "And who are you?" "Tom Miller, human archaeologist." "Sir, you need to mobilize the defense fleet immediately." "These ships. Are you suggesting," the director cut in, "that I should mobilize our forces based on readings from an ancient derelict fleet and the word of a junior archaeologist?" Admiral's voice filled the bridge. "Director Baker, I am the AI commander of this fleet. My sensors are different from yours. They rely on gravitational distortion patterns rather than energy emissions. The threat is real." The director's eyes widened. "A functional AI from a 50,000-year-old fleet." He laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "This grows more absurd by the moment." "Sir," White spoke up, her four hands moving rapidly over the sensor controls. "The swarm will reach the outer colonies in less than 6 hours. We need to act now." "Even if these ships exist," the director said dismissively, "our defense fleet can handle any threat. Our energy weapons are the most advanced in known space." Tom slammed his hand on the console in frustration. "That's exactly the problem. Your weapons won't work against them. That's why this fleet was built. It uses kinetic weapons, physical ammunition that can't be absorbed or deflected by energy shields." The director's face showed a mix of amusement and annoyance. "Mr. Miller, the days of projectile weapons are long past. No advanced civilization will." His image suddenly flickered as a new alarm sounded throughout the bridge. Admiral's voice was urgent. "Detection of 3 Council scout ships at the edge of the system. They've made contact with the swarm." Everyone watched in horror as the tactical display showed 3 bright dots representing the scout ships approach the mass of black vessels. Energy weapons flared, bright beams of concentrated plasma that could cut through most known shields. The beams simply disappeared into the black hulls of the swarm ships. Then the dots representing the scout ships winked out, one by one. "No," Gray whispered. "Those scouts had our best shields, our most powerful weapons." "Director, Tom said, his voice firm. Those ships were just destroyed. Your weapons had no effect. But we have a fleet here that can fight them. A fleet built by my ancestors for exactly this moment. The director's metallic face had lost its amused expression. How can you be sure your weapons will work when ours failed? Because humans understood something fundamental about war, Admiral answered. No matter how advanced energy shields become, they can't stop a physical projectile without converting to solid matter. And the moment they do that, they become vulnerable to kinetic impacts. Tom finished. Railguns, missiles, nuclear warheads. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The swarm has changed course, White reported, her voice shaking. They're heading straight for the nearest populated system. 5 billion people live there. Tom looked at the director's troubled face on the screen. Sir, we don't have time for debates or committees. Either trust us now, or those 5 billion people die. What's your choice? The director was silent for a long moment, looking at the tactical displays showing the approaching swarm. Finally, he spoke. What do you need from us? Clear the space around every colony world, Tom said. Get your ships out of the way. Then watch and learn why humanity built this fleet. Admiral, begin battle preparations. Show them what primitive weapons can do. As the ancient fleet hummed with power around them, Tom couldn't help but smile. His ancestors had been right all along. Sometimes the simplest solution was the best solution, and humanity had always been good at finding simple solutions to complex problems. The ancient fleet moved through space with surprising speed. Tom stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching as crew members from nearby colonies arrived to help staff the other ships. Admiral had been teaching them the basics of operating the primitive systems. Remarkable, White said, studying the tactical displays. These ships are 50,000 years old, but they move like they were built yesterday. Built to last, Tom replied, checking the weapon systems. Every part designed to work for centuries with minimal maintenance. Humans were always good at that, building things that endure. Gray entered the bridge, holding a datapad. His scales had taken on a deep blue color of concern. The Council's Defense Committee is meeting right now. Many of them still don't believe the threat is real. Tom shook his head in frustration. Even after losing those scout ships, they're saying it must have been a malfunction. That no force could possibly defeat their energy weapons so easily. Gray's tail twitched nervously. They've never faced an enemy their weapons couldn't hurt. The main screen lit up with a new alert. Admiral's voice filled the bridge. Incoming transmission from the Defense Committee. The screen showed a panel of different alien species, all looking skeptical. At the center sat Director Baker, his metallic face unreadable. Mr. Miller, one of the committee members, spoke, her crystalline form glittering. You're asking us to believe that this ancient human fleet, using what you call kinetic weapons, can succeed where our most advanced ships failed. Tom straightened his back. Committee member, with respect, we don't have time for this. The swarm will reach the Thompson colony in 4 hours. 8 million people live there. Our latest battle cruisers are moving to intercept, another member said. Their energy cannons are twice as powerful as those scout ships had. You're sending more ships to die, Tom argued. The swarm doesn't care how powerful your energy weapons are. They absorb all forms of energy, but they can't absorb physical matter. Preposterous, a third member scoffed. All advanced civilizations know that energy weapons are the pinnacle of warfare technology. Admiral spoke up, its voice calm but firm. Committee members, I have watched your civilizations develop for 50,000 years. You've all followed the same path, developing more powerful energy weapons, better energy shields. But in doing so, you've forgotten the basic principles of physics. The AI displayed a simulation on their screen. When a physical projectile strikes an energy shield, the shield must become solid to stop it. In that moment, it becomes vulnerable to kinetic force. Your civilizations forgot this because you never needed to remember it. Until now. But surely, one member began, but was cut off by a new alarm. White's 4 hands flew over the sensor controls. The battle cruisers have engaged the swarm. Everyone watched in silence as the tactical display showed the battle. Massive energy beams struck the black ships and disappeared. Particle streams, plasma bolts, and energy torpedoes all vanished into the swarm's hulls. Then the swarm attacked. The battle cruiser's energy shields flared briefly against some invisible force, then failed. Within minutes, the most powerful ships in the Council fleet were gone. The committee members sat in stunned silence. "Now do you understand?" Tom asked quietly. "Your weapons are useless against them. But we have rail guns that fire projectiles at relativistic speeds, nuclear missiles that don't care if their energy is absorbed, kinetic kill vehicles that turn speed and mass into unstoppable weapons." Director Baker leaned forward. "How many ships can you effectively crew?" "Admiral can operate the entire fleet with minimal crews," Tom replied. "We need maybe 20 people per ship just to handle things I can't do easily. With the volunteers we have now, we can run about 30 ships. And the other 17. Tom smiled grimly. "They'll be our surprise. Admiral can control them remotely." Baker looked at the other committee members, then back at Tom. "You have full authority to proceed, Mr. Miller. Save our people. Show us what your ancestors' primitive fleet can do." As the transmission ended, Tom turned to his crew. "Admiral, begin final battle preparations. Target each ship's rail guns and missile tubes. Load the special warheads, the ones designed to split into thousands of pieces on impact." "What good will that do?" Gray asked. Tom's smile grew wider. "Remember what Admiral said about energy shields having to turn solid to stop physical objects. Now imagine thousands of pieces hitting them at once. The shields can't adapt fast enough. It's like throwing sand at a wall of water. Some of it gets through." White checked her readings. 3 hours until they reach Thompson Colony. "Then we have 3 hours to teach them why humanity's old fleet is still dangerous." Tom took his place at the command station. "Admiral, signal all ships. It's time to show the galaxy why they shouldn't have laughed at our primitive weapons." The ancient fleet moved into formation, weapons warming up, ready to face an enemy that had never encountered old-fashioned human ingenuity. The real battle was about to begin. The ancient fleet hung in space between Thompson Colony and the approaching swarm. 30 manned ships and 17 automated vessels formed a defensive line that stretched across 50,000 kilometers. From the flagship's bridge, Tom watched the enemy approach. 2 minutes until they enter weapons range," White announced, her 4 hands steady on the sensor controls. "Their numbers. There must be thousands of them." "Numbers don't matter," Tom said firmly. "Admiral, status of the weapon systems. All rail guns charged, nuclear missiles armed. Kinetic kill vehicles ready for launch. The fleet awaits your command." Admiral's voice carried no fear, only calm determination. Gray stood at his station, scales now a pale blue. "The colony's evacuation ships are still launching. They need more time. Then we'll give them time." Tom straightened in his chair. "Admiral, execute Battle Plan Alpha. Let's show them what humanity's primitive weapons can do." The swarm approached like a black cloud, their ships absorbing all light around them. They seemed confident, having easily destroyed the Council's most advanced vessels. "They're entering weapons range," White reported. "No sign they view us as a threat. They're not even in defensive formation." Tom smiled grimly. "Perfect. Admiral, launch first wave of kinetic kill vehicles." From the automated ships at the fleet's edges, hundreds of small objects launched silently into space. They looked like simple metal rods, each about the size of a small car. "KKV's accelerating to attack speed," Admiral announced. "Impact in 10 seconds." The swarm ships didn't react. They had faced the best energy weapons in the galaxy and survived. What harm could simple metal rods do? Impact. The kinetic kill vehicles struck their targets at a significant fraction of light speed. Physics didn't care about advanced technology or energy absorption. Mass times velocity equaled force, and that equation hadn't changed in 50,000 years. 20 swarm ships simply ceased to exist, torn apart by the sheer kinetic energy of the impacts. Direct hits, White exclaimed. Their formation is breaking up. The swarm ships scattered, finally recognizing the threat. They tried to raise their energy-absorbing fields, but physics couldn't be denied. More ships disappeared as the KKVs found their marks. They're adapting, Admiral warned. Energy fields are attempting to deflect incoming projectiles. Just as we planned, Tom replied. Launch the spreader missiles. The manned ships opened fire. Missiles streaked across space, but these weren't ordinary weapons. As they approached their targets, each missile split into thousands of smaller projectiles. Like throwing sand at a wall of water, Tom muttered, remembering his earlier explanation. The swarm's defenses couldn't adapt fast enough. They could stop some of the fragments, but not all. Their perfect energy-absorbing technology meant nothing against the ancient human tactic of overwhelming the enemy with sheer numbers of projectiles. Rail guns in range, Admiral announced. Ready to fire. All ships, open fire. The rail guns spoke. Each ship carried dozens of them, firing metal slugs at velocities that made the shots nearly impossible to see. The swarm's energy fields tried to solidify to stop them, but that only made them vulnerable to the kinetic impact. More enemy ships died, torn apart by humanity's primitive weapons. They're pulling back, Gray reported, excitement in his voice. I don't think they've ever had to retreat before. But Tom saw something in their movement pattern. No, they're not retreating. They're gathering for a mass attack. Admiral, activate the last surprise. Show them what a primitive nuclear warhead can do. The automated ships in the center of the fleet opened their launch bays. Special missiles emerged, each carrying multiple nuclear warheads designed by humans 50,000 years ago. Nuclear launch detected. The swarm finally seemed to recognize the threat. They moved to intercept. Too late, Tom whispered. The warheads detonated, not against the ships, but in the space between them. The swarm's energy-absorbing fields tried to contain the massive release of energy, but there was too much, too fast. Their fields overloaded. Ships lost power. In the chaos, rail guns and kinetic kill vehicles found easy targets. The swarm is breaking up, White reported, wonder in her voice. They're actually running away. Tom watched as the mighty swarm, terror of the galaxy, fled from humanity's ancient weapons. The weapons they had laughed at. The primitive technology they had dismissed. Send word to the council, he ordered. Tell them Thompson Colony is safe. And tell them this was just the first battle. Now they know why humanity built this fleet, and why they built it to last. The ancient ships held their position, rail guns still tracking the retreating enemy. Humanity's gift to the future had proven its worth. The laughter had stopped. 3 days after the battle at Thompson Colony, Tom stood before the Galactic Council. The great chamber was packed with representatives from every major civilization. No one was laughing now. The swarm has regrouped at the edge of known space, Tom reported, gesturing to the tactical display. They lost nearly 300 ships in the battle, but thousands remain. They're learning, adapting, but so are we. Director Baker leaned forward, his metallic face reflecting the holographic display. Tell us what you need, Mr. Miller. The Council is ready to provide full support. We need crews, Tom replied. Volunteers to help operate the remaining ships in the fleet. Admiral can handle most functions, but we need people for critical decisions and maintenance. You'll have them, Baker promised. But tell us more about these weapons. How did your ancestors create such effective systems? Tom walked to the center of the chamber. They understood something fundamental. The more advanced a civilization becomes, the more they rely on energy-based technology. But physical matter, that follows rules that can't be changed. He pressed a button, showing footage from the battle. Look at how the swarm's ships died. Their energy-absorbing fields meant nothing against kinetic weapons. A railgun round traveling at relativistic speeds doesn't care about your advanced shields. It just hits. White, who stood at a nearby console, added her own observations. The nuclear warheads were especially clever. They weren't designed to destroy ships directly. Instead, they overloaded the swarm's energy-absorbing systems. Your ancestors predicted all of this, a council member asked, their crystalline form shimmering with interest. They predicted that energy-based defenses would become common, Tom explained. So they built weapons that bypassed those defenses entirely. Then they hid this fleet and waited, knowing someday it would be needed. Gray, his scales now a confident shade of blue, stepped forward. We've analyzed the fleet's construction. Every part was built to last for millennia. The AIs were programmed to learn and adapt. Even the ammunition was designed to remain stable for 50,000 years. And now, Tom continued, we need to take the fight to them. The swarm is wounded, but not defeated. They'll come back stronger, trying to counter our weapons. We need to strike before they can adapt. The chamber's main screen lit up. Admiral's voice filled the room. New contact detected. Multiple swarm ships approaching the Stevens system. Their formation suggests they've modified their defenses. Tom turned to Director Baker. We need those crews now. The swarm is testing us, seeing if we can protect multiple systems at once. You'll have them within the hour, Baker promised. Every colony has volunteers ready. They've all seen what your fleet can do. The tactical display showed more swarm ships appearing in other systems. Tom studied the pattern, then smiled. They're making a mistake. Admiral, do you see it? Affirmative, the AI replied. They're spreading themselves thin, trying to threaten multiple targets. Their new defenses require more power, forcing them to use smaller groups, which makes them vulnerable to our hit-and-run tactics, Tom finished. He turned to the council. We'll split the fleet into task forces, hit them fast and hard, then jump to the next target. We have 47 ships that can each take out dozens of their vessels. The human's gift keeps giving, Gray remarked. A fleet that saved us once, now teaching us how to fight back. Alarms sounded throughout the chamber. Admiral's voice was urgent but confident. Swarm ships entering weapons range in the Stevens system. 3 task forces ready for immediate response. Tom looked at Director Baker. Sir, request permission to engage the enemy. Baker stood, addressing the entire council. 3 days ago, we laughed at this fleet, called it primitive, outdated. Now it's our best hope for survival. He turned to Tom. Permission granted, Mr. Miller. Show us again why humanity's engineering should never be underestimated. Tom nodded to White and Gray. To your ships. Admiral, signal all crews to battle stations. Time to remind the swarm why they ran from us the first time. As they hurried to their vessels, Tom thought about his ancestors. They had built this fleet not for themselves, but for a future they would never see. They had trusted that when the time came, someone would understand their gift and use it wisely. The ancient fleet powered up once more, ready to protect the galaxy with humanity's primitive but powerful weapons. The swarm was about to learn that some lessons need to be taught twice. 6 months after the first battle, Tom stood on the observation deck of the flagship, watching as construction crews worked on building new ships. Below them, the shipyards of New Earth stretched for kilometers, producing vessels that combine modern technology with humanity's ancient wisdom. Remarkable how things change, Gray said, standing beside him. His scales now showed the deep blue of contentment. 6 months ago, we laughed at these primitive designs. Now every civilization wants to build them. Tom smiled, remembering how far they'd come. The swarm had fought hard, adapting their tactics again and again. But in the end, they couldn't overcome the simple physics of kinetic weapons. 3 weeks ago, The last swarm ship had fled known space, leaving behind the wreckage of thousands of their vessels. "Director Baker has arrived," Admiral announced. "He's requesting permission to board." "Granted," Tom replied. "I think he'll like what we have to show him." Minutes later, Baker walked onto the observation deck, his metallic skin gleaming. "Mr. Miller, Gray, the Council is very interested in your new project." Tom gestured to the shipyards below. "Humanity's next gift to the galaxy. We're combining the best of both worlds, modern energy weapons alongside railguns and kinetic kill vehicles, ships that can fight any enemy, no matter their defenses. And the best part," Gray added, "is how simple the principles are. Every civilization can build these ships. No highly advanced technology required, just solid engineering and good physics." Baker walked to the window, watching the construction. "The Council has officially designated this as the start of a new age in our history. We're calling it the Human Renaissance." "My ancestors would find that funny," Tom said. "They built their fleet knowing that sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution. They knew that creatures like the swarm might evolve, beings who could counter our most advanced weapons. So they went back to basics." "Speaking of basics," Baker said, turning from the window, "our archaeologists have found something interesting. More human vaults, hidden across the galaxy. Some contain ships, others have weapons or technology, all built to last until they were needed." Tom wasn't surprised. They would have had backup plans. Redundancy was always a human trait. "Admiral, did you know about these other vaults?" "I knew they existed," the eye replied, "but not their locations. It was part of the plan. Multiple independent resources, in case some were found and destroyed." "Your ancestors were very thorough." A small ship flew past the window, catching Baker's attention. "What's that design? I haven't seen it before." "Our latest project," Tom said proudly. "We're teaching other civilizations how to build simple, reliable vessels, ships that don't depend entirely on advanced technology. The Council fleet will always have its energy weapons, but now they'll have options." "Options," Gray repeated. "That's what saved us, isn't it? Having weapons the swarm didn't expect, never depending on just one type of technology." Baker nodded thoughtfully. "The Council has voted to establish a new department. We're calling it the Heritage Division. Its job will be to preserve and study human engineering principles, to make sure we never forget these lessons. And to remember," Tom added, "that sometimes old wisdom is the best wisdom." The observation deck fell silent as they watched the shipyards. Dozens of new vessels were under construction, each combining the best of modern technology with humanity's proven designs. The rail guns would work even if the energy weapons failed. The backup systems would keep running even if the main computer went down. Everything built to last, just as Tom's ancestors had built their fleet. "We found more AIs in the other vaults," Baker said finally. "They're like Admiral, designed to learn, to adapt, to protect. Your ancestors left us an entire network of guardians." Tom smiled. "They built all this 50,000 years ago, knowing they wouldn't live to see it used. They did it for us, for everyone who would come after them. That's humanity's real legacy, thinking ahead, planning for the worst, and building things that last." A new ship rose from the construction bay, its hull gleaming in the starlight. It carried the latest energy weapons, but also housed rail guns and missile tubes. Like the ancient fleet that inspired it, it was built to face any threat, to endure any challenge. "No one's laughing at human engineering now," Gray said softly. "No," Tom agreed, watching the new ship join its siblings in orbit. "Now they're learning from it. And that's exactly what my ancestors hoped would happen. The legacy of humanity's ancient fleet would live on, teaching future generations that sometimes the old ways were the best ways, and that the simplest solutions were often the most enduring."